Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebizradio.com. Today we've got Craig Page-Lee, our marketing and communications expert, joining us. Craig, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm great, Kevin. Thank you. Yeah, good to be chatting again, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, so last week's conversation was quite an interesting conversation we had. We touched on organizers and brands and what they are doing for the mental health narrative, and that it is so prevalent in today's society. What I really appreciated about the session was the direct association that mental health narrative has on so many of our leadership conversations that I'm currently having in my workspace. And what's interesting that I'm loving that people are starting to pay attention to is the importance of really showcasing that brands in itself are starting to really build a narrative around mental health. But also, I think people sometimes take it for granted that leaders are supposed to just have all the answers and just be upbeat and not really, they don't really have mental health issues. And yet mental health affects everyone and anyone. So the fact that, brands are really starting to pay attention to that and showcase that mental health is it's a serious big thing, and everybody gets affected to that or affected by it. I think that's what's really key is, employers need to recognize that leaders are sometimes in the very same position. But the more we have this conversation, the more we sort of bring it to the foreground. Craig, so before we get stuck into today's topic, will you give us a quick overview and key takeouts from our conversation on mental health narrative that we had last week?
Kevin, yes, thanks. So to begin with, I just want to say that the pressures and challenges that impact on and cause a deterioration in mental health and wellness are ever present, and that employees more than ever need support from their employers during these challenging times. And with that in mind, just want to pick up on a few of the points as a reminder from our discussion last week. So let me start by saying that the pandemic has resulted in worldwide economic recession. This has obviously negatively affected many people's lives through job losses, the challenges of remote working, and in many instances, loss of family members. And as such, there's been a substantial increase in the number of mental illness cases being reported. Some of the statistics to be aware of, 1 in 10 adults in the USA reported symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorder in the first half of 2019, growing to an alarming 4 in 10 adults during the pandemic. And there was specific negative impact on their mental health and well-being around the likes of difficulty of sleep, 36% reporting that, another 32% reporting eating disorders, and 12% reporting an increase in alcohol consumption or substance abuse during this period. And worsening existing chronic conditions, 12% increase there. However, we have fortunately seen an improvement in the situation, as some of the most recent data notes that there has been, coming out of the 2020 timeline into 2021, a 30% decline in the risk of depression, a 25% decline in post-traumatic stress disorder, and a 21% increase in sustained attention, which is really positive. However, risk of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and sustained attention levels still remain worse than before COVID, with risk of depression at 71% higher than before COVID, and risk of post-traumatic stress disorder 33% higher than before COVID. So still quite alarming, and I can genuinely assume that these figures are much more dramatic in South Africa, though.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I think the one good thing that I took from the discussion last week is the number of committed brands and organizations that are actively driving projects and initiatives to help employees, but young adults and teenagers manage through these tough times. You mentioned last week that that today's topic is somewhat of an extension, or at least in some direct association to last week's conversation. Can you share with us what to expect today?
Yes, Kevin, thanks. Absolutely. So today we're going to look at sort of three components in the conversation. One is looking at the trends driving remote work, then looking at what employers and employees are saying as companies start bringing the staff back to a more formal structured environments in the office, and what working from home may look like in the next year or two. And Kevin, it's a big topic, and as I expected when I started out on this, there's a ton of information on the web that I had to trawl through, just to ensure that I cover the topic sufficiently and present the key points in a way that leaders can be aware of how to deal with this dynamic and ever-changing reality. And for me, the one thing that I've grappled with a lot on this topic for some time now is something that clearly emerged as a repeating theme in a number of the articles that I read. This being the point that employers and employees definitely disagree on some of the points of what the future of remote work looks like.
I guess that's an inevitable, Craig. As I've also noted, some of the key points in various discussions I've had with executives in leadership development and the work that I do, many executives spoke about the concerns that they have around company culture and the fears that they have that being impacted on by a sudden need to work remotely, without really understanding how to make their business future-proof and resilient to this kind of impact in their organization culture. The other points that are mentioned that relate to performance of employees while working remotely, especially in the instance of mothers having to balance workload and homeschooling, and probably the most important point being the lack of access to technology infrastructure, and I suppose especially in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Craig, what can you share to the point of the employer and employee disagreement? Because I think that's really a sort of an affecting factor to where we are in the world today.
Absolutely, Kevin. Yeah. So let me start by referencing an article from Workflow Service Now blog, quite an interesting blog. The article titled "The New Age of Innovation: How COVID is Redefining the Future of Work" was published by Dave Wright as recently as October 2020. The article addresses this point directly. So I'm going to start by having a quick read from the opening extract because it clearly defines what those challenges are. So the future arrived sooner than anyone expected. 92% of executives say COVID-19 forced their company to rethink how work gets done, and 91%, in addition to 87% of employees, admitted the change happened faster than they thought possible. Employees overwhelmingly like these innovations, with their day-to-day characterized by distributed, flexible work. Their leaders, however, are not so sure. Nearly half want to return to the pre-COVID business procedures and arrangements. That's unsurprising after decades in which organizations relied on face-to-face interactions to manage the mess of modern-day work knowledge. Under the system, presence was a proxy for performance, and tasks were assigned haphazardly with no means to track who was working on what and how that work was progressing. Employees overwhelmingly like these innovations with their day-to-day characterized by distributed, flexible work. The article continues. Proximity helped leaders feel secure about work being done and allowed employees to collaborate through informal chats that bridged departmental silos. When a question arose, the answer was really more than a few cubicles away. And as a result, location, and to a lesser extent, time, became the connective tissue of that enterprise. An interesting statement, I must say. Then the proximity upon which the work depended vanished. And although we initially pulled together, the survey shows that trust and coordination issues rapidly began to emerge. 93% of executives and 83% of employees are concerned about the impact that remote work will have on their companies, with employers most worried about delays in product or service delivery, and employees actually worried about challenges in collaboration. So as you see, Kevin, there's a distinct difference in what employees want to see being implemented versus what employees are expecting the norm to be moving forward.
Yeah, and it's strange that trust and coordination are the biggest factors
Yeah,
affecting the world right now. So it's
yeah,
like
can you believe it?
who am I employing, and is it working? Is it a good idea? So I mean, I guess that fear is probably a big driver on the side of the employers, and the freedom from organizational structure and rigor is a driver from the side of the employees.
Absolutely, and I do like that, Kevin. But finding the middle ground, I think, is yeah, really going to be the toughest challenge for leaders in the immediate future, because there are many variables to consider in meeting the needs of all these employees, and as we know, that's no small task for any leadership team. So, whilst I was thinking about it, a couple of simple and obvious themes sprang to mind going through the various reports. For instance, workers want flexibility of work location. They want to know what the offices are going to look like moving forward, especially from a space point of view. Workstations, are they moving further apart? What's the proximity to each other? Where are the safe zones in the business? Are communal work areas reduced? What other on-site services and amenities will be available, et cetera, et cetera? And interestingly, we actually picked up on a few of these in one of our previous conversations. But
Yeah,
the key point to consider here, though, is that of workplace physical location. It came about time and time again. Is it a fixed office address? Is it various destinations like co-work spaces? Is it a home office? Or actually, is it a mix of home and fixed office location? Variable seems to be the current status quo. However, what we do know, though, is employees want their employers to provide flexibility of work location after the pandemic ends. So it's not just a
yeah,
current issue. It definitely seems to be something that's moving into the future, and there's some expectation built around that. So the burning question for me here, and yeah, I'm wearing my hat as a past architect, and having spent an inordinate amount of time in the commercial corporate real estate world, is, yeah, does the corporate head office need to break up? Are there going to be more disparate remote locations in environments that are closer to employees? And again, the key challenge here then there are obviously increased costs due to the possible duplication of many functions, new rental agreements for the different locations, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge, though, is that many workforce teams will nevertheless remain virtual for an extended period, which means that operating procedures actually really need to be repurposed to enable that fully integrated approach through workflow and systems. And a byproduct of that is reskilling becomes an important requirement, because roles and scope is continuously changing due to this remote amorphous organic work delivery as well. And leadership really needs to understand how to build high performance, high engagement virtual teams so as to ensure optimum performance irrespective of work location. The remote team's performance management issue is a key consideration. And the good thing about it, though, is we're seeing technology and apps making appearance, and these are enabling more effective performance management functionality. What's quite interesting here is I noted in an article that Accenture found that 45% of employees are rating their employer's response to the pandemic as neutral or negative. And this is a warning signal for employees that their organizations are vulnerable to risk of reputation and image. So something that employees really need to take cognizance of.
yeah,
Again,
yeah, yeah.
a big point here is digital security is an issue. The more teams operate remotely, Kevin, and from multiple locations, the higher the challenge on the business to ensure security, business continuity, disaster recovery, and obviously just pure digital security from a technology point of view and communication point of view. But my final thought on those points is that talent gap needs to be addressed, or let me rephrase, it's probably the most opportune time to revisit the talent gap in organizations and to structure that ultimate team to meet the evolving form in which companies are going to look like moving forward beyond COVID in 2021. But again, contentious points, and I do throw a few out in my daily existence in the business, is I always make the point that leadership must be cognizant that the business is the people, namely the employees, but the people must fit into the business and not the business being forced to fit around the people. And that, again, is one of those fine balancing acts where, do employees understand that they need to fit to enable the business to move forward, but do employers understand that employees need to fit their business vision and strategy as well?
Craig, I'm just listening to all these points, and I'm just, one of the key things that we teach people, there's something called a requisite variety. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but, and it's not part of this list here, but it speaks to the person with the highest flexibility in the behavior and choices rules the system. And that's something we teach, in our programs and our coaching as well. If you really have the ability to be flexible in choices and behavior, you get to rule the system. And I think a big question here is in my head going, do people actually, are leaders really do they have that flexibility of behavior and choice? And do they actually rule the system? Because you can't, but like you're saying, it's a very fine line, right? But that's also a lot. It's a lot that business leaders need to consider in trying to make their organizations future-proof and trying to mitigate the impact on expectations between employers and employees. So, taking all of that into account, how are companies in South Africa dealing with the reality?
Yeah, Kevin, firstly, thanks for your piece of insight there, and really great to hear that, because flexibility is absolutely, believe it or not, the stickiness that creates the opportunity for it's so weird, because the unstructured piece is the structured piece that when you have in place, it allows you to move forward in that way. So great point. What's really cool is I did find some wonderful insights for South African companies, because it's always, as we mentioned before, challenge where some of these topics are really driven by global research and study. So I came across a good article in news24.com, which was titled, "Many South Africans Want to Work from Home, but Bosses Won't Let Them." This article was published by Karen Smith on the 12th of February, and it addressed an interesting report, the Robert Walters 2021 salary survey. Robert Walters being a leading recruiting firm in South Africa. And the study was conducted across about 2,000 professionals in South Africa, with the findings telling us the following. Almost 40% of South Africans want to continue to work from home after coronavirus lockdown. And their preference is to move to a full-time remote working situation. You can see the parallels with the international commentary straight away. A further 27% want to work remotely at least 50% of the time during the year. Interestingly, that talks to that hybrid model where you at least have a fixed abode with a physical office address, but you also have the opportunity of working from home. Employers are ever not as keen on the idea, claiming that productivity is being negatively affected. And again, we're hearing this all the time, but that COVID has sped up the work from home trend by 5 to 10 years for some of these companies. And this is where leadership really is grappling on understanding how to deal with this reality, because it was going to come. There's no doubt about it. For many years, we've seen top organizations around the world adopting a flexible approach to their workforces. So it was inevitable that it was going to be a more broad-based reality. But, the leaders, 5 to 10 years, pulled that forward. They're battling. 25% of companies stated that their traditional senior leadership team will be a key barrier to making this type of leadership a reality, as many apparently still prefer the bums on seats approach to professional work. And this is probably a space that you play an important role in your leadership mentoring and guidance, because it's taking those leaders out of that rigorous linear one-dimensional viewpoint. Almost 70% of the professionals surveyed stated that the overall experience, or at least expectations, of the employer has changed in the past year due to COVID. 48% of employers indicated that they'll be looking to change their offering in response to the changes in employee expectation, which is a positive thing. It really is. With 40% of employers wanting to reduce or reconfigure the office space, 43% wanting to enhance the mental health and well-being policies. Beautiful total tie into last week's conversation. And 46% wanting to increase investment in technology, apps, and tools. One of the key conflict points here, though, Kevin, is that 66% of professionals reported an increase in productivity while working from home, while 24% of employers actually raised concerns around employee productivity and cited that as a key barrier to long-term remote working. So there's almost a 3 to 1, 2.7 to 1 ratio between the perception of employees to those of employers. So again, we have a real challenge here in overcoming those differences. 29% of employees, again, stated that they enjoyed the flexible hours with home working, and almost 29% stated that working from home has allowed for increased focus on well-being. This, again, tying into that mental health narrative we spoke about last week. 35% found that the more regular updates and check-in calls with managers and colleagues during lockdown actually were more positive to their style of work. And 59% of the respondents stated that the enhanced use of technology and apps and tools are actually advancements that must stay and be part of the committed future working way, which is good to see. Another good point that I noted is that 51% of respondents stated that compulsory remote working inadvertently encouraged them to improve their business communications in a way that office working would not have encouraged. And that's really great to see. So reliance on virtual presentations, over the phone discussions, video calls obviously being the key driver, but the ability to then think about how to articulate message, how to deliver the needs to enable the better performance with their staff was really important, and a big win for both sides of the equation there. The survey also indicated that during lockdown, professionals in South Africa, I can vouch for this, ditched emails. 39% of professionals reduced email use, 74% increase in instant messaging platform use. How's that for you? 55% adopted video calls and 62% adopted phone calls as their primary form of workplace communication. Emails, long-winded instantaneousness of lack of contact is really what drove the use of the other platforms. So there's a wonderful quote by Samantha Jane Gravett. She's associate director at Robert Walters Africa, the firm adopting the study, and it really encapsulates the status quo of the situation for South African companies, though, and it reads as follows, Kevin. While there is no right answer, companies will really need to take stock of working practice this year to see what will best serve the needs of both employees and their business in the long term.
Thanks for sharing the insights from the South African point of view, Craig. With these expectations in mind, what are you hearing from international markets?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. I came across a really great read on Forbes.com titled, "Here's What You Need to Know to Prepare for the Post-Pandemic Future." It was published by contributors Jim Ludmer and Amber Johnson on the 8th of November 2020. And what's really great here is that both contributors saw there was a rapid increase in the number of future work articles being published during COVID-19. So they collectively reviewed about 40 of these articles and reports and then compiled them into a summary of the findings with key tips. And fortunately, I was able to come across this particular document. Important, though, to give a sense of understanding of the relevance of their findings presented in the summary, Kevin, the articles and reports that they covered were published by the likes of McKinsey, the World Economic Forum, the Society for Human Resource Management, and by various other global corporate real estate organizations, which is also an important point of reference for us. The common themes that emerged from reading these various articles are fairly similar to those expressed in the South African content that we covered a short while ago. So for instance, for employees, there's more freedom and more flexibility in the working hours remotely, and a huge benefit in being able to adjust schedules according to family needs and other personal needs. There are, however, more distractions and disruptions, as we well know. And as discussed last week, we were acutely aware of the physical interaction with colleagues or the lack of physical interaction with colleagues that could lead to anxiety and even depression. Important point for leadership is to note that many of the employees don't want to return to the 40-hour plus week with their limited vacations and 6 days and the likes when the crisis passed. They want the status quo to continue as it is now. However, giving employees more control over their hours could significantly reduce employee turnover. So very important point to note for leaders in that regard. On the other side, though, many managers are still struggling to maintain high performance from workers who are no longer in close proximity. And this often requires a key change in how managers communicate their expectations and instructions and work virtually with their teams. Big challenge there. So picking up on this really from a people point of view, I want to get into further detail and share some of the incredible insights from that specific report that was referenced by Jim and Amber. This particular report approached it from an HR point of view, as it really brings the reality of getting it right between employers and employees. And let me dive into this. So found on Gartner.com and published by Mary Baker on the 8th of June 2020, the report's titled 9 Future of Work Trends Post-COVID-19 states the following. As the pandemic resets work trends, HR leaders need to rethink workforce and employee planning, management, performance, and experience strategies. 9 HR trends emerge as the lasting result of workforce and workplace changes resulting from the coronavirus pandemic disruption, according to the survey of 800 plus HR leaders. The imperative for those leaders now is to evaluate the impact each HR trend will have on their organization's operations and strategic goals, identify which require immediate action, and assess to what degree these HR trends change pre-COVID-19 strategic goals and plans. Of the 9 trends, some represent an acceleration of existing shifts, others are a new impact not previously discussed, and in some cases, COVID-19 has forced the pendulum of long-observed pattern to one extreme. So in a headline, here are the 9 trends, Kevin. More remote work, increased use of employee data, greater role of the employer as a social safety net, important point that, wider use of freelance contract workers in the new gig economy, critical skills no longer being synonymous with roles, some finding work more humanizing, others finding it more dehumanizing, a focus on crisis response as it distinguishes top-tier employee brands, prioritizing resilience as much as efficiency, and added strain to employee engagement, culture, and value proposition. Some of those we picked up on last week. So if you don't mind, I'll take you through 2 or 3 bullet points on each of those trends, Kevin, because it really gives us a deep understanding of the human connection under pressure in this COVID reality. So looking at point number 1, increase in remote working. 48% of employees will likely work remotely at least part of the time from COVID-19 versus 30% before the pandemic. So that's almost a 50% increase in the reality of what was in place pre-COVID. And yeah, that's a hell of a lot for organizations to digest. Organizations need to explore the critical competencies that employees will need to collaborate digitally and to be prepared to adjust employee experience strategies to enable this. Point number 2, expanded data collection. Now, this is where a lot of contention could really come about in the future around employees working remotely. 16% of employers are using technologies more frequently to monitor their employees through methods such as virtual clocking in and out, tracking work computer usage, and monitoring employee emails or internal communications and chat. While some companies track productivity, others monitor employee engagement, as well as being able to better understand the employee experience. So whilst this may all sound like it's really trying to build a positive opportunity to keep the communications flow and engagement in a more effective way, Kevin, I think a lot of employees probably also feel that there's a trust issue that comes to play in this regard here. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and it also lends itself to micromanaging. You know, how do you make sure that you're not getting to a point where you're micromanaging people, but you actually are still managing them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really, really good point. And those are aspects that I think are going to form part of the learning for organizations and the entrenchment of new cultures in being able to manage disparate teams and things like that. Yeah. So number 3 is the contingent worker expansion. Economic uncertainty in the pandemic has caused many workers to lose their jobs and exposed others for the first time to non-standard work models. And here we're seeing employers reducing contract budgets, and they've done this through methods such as talent sharing and the 80% pay for 80% work. And obviously there's a lot more increased usage of freelancers and contract-based work in this gig economy. Point 4, expanded employee role as a social safety net. Really nice point here. Some employers are playing an expanded role in the employee's financial, physical, and mental well-being, with support including the likes of enhanced sick leave, financial assistance, and adjusted hours of operations and childcare provisions. So good to see the human aspect really coming to the fore there. And I just hope that that is something that continues, because it's a vitally important part of ensuring that mental wellness and mental health piece we spoke about here. Number 5, the separation of critical skills and roles. Before COVID-19, critical roles were reviewed as roles with critical skills or the capabilities an organization needed to meet its strategic goals. Now employees are realizing that there is another category of critical roles that are critical to the success of essential workflows. And as we mentioned earlier on in the discussion, the establishment of seamless workflows is really where the future is relative to remote working, and understanding what skill set or what individuals' capabilities are to enable that is really where the skill alignment is moving forward. Dehumanizing or humanizing of employers in point 6. Some organizations have prioritized the well-being of employees as people over employees as workers. Great to read that. Others, however, have pushed employees to working conditions that are high risk with little support, treating them as workers first and people second. Now, I just want to expand on that a bit, where the last point is really important in many industries, particularly in the creative industry, communications industry, where we're actually seeing not just the challenge coming from employers onto employees, but the challenge and demands that are being posed on employees by clients alike as well. And it's really about trying to find where the balance of power is between client dictates and demands and needing employees to be available 24/7, and what the response is relative to that. And I'm hearing constantly about the pressures that agency folk have felt relative to almost needing to be available 24/7. So that's dehumanization of employees doesn't just apply to the behavior from employers, but actually what's happening from a client level into the organizations as well. Point number 7, emergence of new top-tier employers. Employees and prospective candidates will judge organizations by the way in which they treat employees during the pandemic. And, I think, again, a point we mentioned early on in the conversation is, what is that relative to reputation management and damage for organizations? 2 more to go. Point number 8, transition from designing for efficiency to designing for resilience. Lovely term, that. 55% of organizational redesigns were focused on streamlining roles, supply chains, and workflows to increase efficiency. Challenge here with that, this approach also created fragilities because, Kevin, as you know, systems have no flexibility to respond to disruption. So whilst the rigidity capability of aligning roles in supply chains and workflows and increasing efficiency may well be good for the business on one end. It's not necessarily good for people on the other end either. And the last point here is increase in organization complexity. So companies will focus on expanding their geographic diversification and investment in secondary markets to mitigate and manage risk in times of disruption. And just for me to add on to that point as well is also to have touch points, physical touch points in the forms of remote offices that possibly may be closer to some of the remote locations of where workers are, helping them mitigate and reduce travel time and things like that. The rising complexity of size and organizational management will, however, create challenges for leaders as operating models evolve. Those are the 9 points. And as you can see, it really is, it's great to be able to find an article that's talking about the human aspect as opposed to just the physical, the travel, what's happening in the real estate world and the likes.
Yeah, Craig, you know what, as I'm just sitting quietly listening to all of these points and all the everything that sort of supports these trends, and sort of what's standing out for me about this is how the world is indirectly being forced to really start questioning how we do what we do. And is it the most effective way to do it? And do we get the best out of our employees? Do we get the best out of our consumers? Do we make everybody happy? You know, it's really starting to push those buttons, and saying to organizations, and I think in my head, it still comes back to that take responsibility theme. You know, are we taking responsibility of how we do what we do to be an employer or to be an employee? How do we do that? And what is the best strategy to do it? Because I think,
love that. Yeah.
You know, our world needs it. Humans need it. You know, it comes to the where I'm sitting today, sitting next to a river, based on the fact that it's my birthday weekend, being able to do this with you.
Yeah.
And although we had a bit of technical glitches and power failures and stuff, the prime reasoning behind it is it's my birthday weekend and I wanted to be away and I wanted to just do something different. But the fact that I'm able to do this and I'm able to be sitting here next to a river while you're talking to me, you know, just that simple fact shows that, yes, the world is definitely moving into a place, especially in my environment, especially in, you know, what I'm busy doing, sort of supporting that the way we've done work, the way we do work is changing. And I'm all for it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I love it. It really is. It's absolutely essential. Not just fantastic, but it's absolutely essential. And you know, the concept of human-centric design really coming to the fore in a way that possibly hasn't been considered and understood, and placing it at the center point. What I find incredibly fascinating, you know, Kim, coming from my architectural days and spending an inordinate amount of time in corporate real estate and commercial fit outs and space planning and things like that, as well as is building buildings for people interaction. Okay. And doing an incredible amount of strategic thinking to understand the association of business teams with each other and how communication flow works within those spaces. And that really was a key delivery and a key interest area in my life as an architect. And I think it's extended into the fascination I have with change management and organizational development, because the physicality of space is a driver in the behavior of people and vice versa. And then we got to a point in time where the office structure broke up and it became more free flow and open plan, and you would think that communication flow would work more seamlessly. But that was countered by people sitting in those open plan spaces with headphones on and actually now isolating themselves even more than they were when they might have been in small offices with 2 or 3 people. And there's this interesting evolution of space to people usage to behavior. Then the millennials arrive and the whole world just flips and lays on its back to do everything to the needs and dictates of millennials. But actually now we're seeing that they are the folk that are going, guys, we want to come back to a structured environment where we have somebody next to us an arm length away, where we have the human support and the emotional connection, and actually where we can ask people and learn from on-the-job training. So fascinating evolution that is cyclical, and it's not going to stop and I'm quite intrigued to look forward to 2 years to see where we are as a society in a workforce environment.
Absolutely. Craig, so in closing today, what are the tips that you can share with the listeners? I mean, there's so many, but I think there are such significant points that we can take away from today's chat about working remotely, what companies are doing, what the trends are looking like. Tell us what those tips are.
Okay, so I sort of migrated part of my conversation into the space already, because what I wanted to look at is sort of 3 key tips, and these came care of Cushman and Wakefield, the leading global corporate real estate management company, and it's nice to see the sort of connectedness between the people and the space aspect that I was alluding to here. So 3 tips. Productivity can occur anywhere, not just at the office. So remote workers were more engaged and had better workplace experiences than office workers pre-COVID. So that's an important learning, is for organizations to understand what was happening within their teams for those that were already working remotely. Challenge here is that, but increased team collaboration was achieved through better use of remote collaborative technology. The key benefit that is here, and something that we really need to leverage on is the ability to focus on how can technology enable that, irrespective of being remote. Flexibility and choice to work from anywhere is accelerating. I alluded to that in 2 or 3 instances, but the human connection and social bonding are suffering, and the impact on connection to corporate culture and learning, where younger generations are reporting more challenges working from home, are really prevalent. And the last point there is just the optimum way forward will be a total workplace ecosystem, where the workplace will no longer be a single location, but an ecosystem of a variety of locations and experiences to support convenience, functionality, and most importantly, well-being. The purpose of the office will be to provide inspiring destinations that strengthens cultural connection, learning, bonding with customers and colleagues, and supports innovation. And if there's one thing alone, point number 3 is probably the most important of the entire conversation. And that's probably the point I will carry forward into my thinking as to what this may look like in the next 2 years, because that also talks to organizational development, Kevin.
Yeah, Craig, it's exciting times coming up, I think.
Yes.
So, thank you, Craig. Such a intriguing conversation to be had. Finally, for what we have coming up next week, what do we do? Where are we going for our next conversation?
Okay, I've put myself under quite a bit of pressure here, because what I'm trying to achieve needs a lot of one-on-one engagements and interactions over the next few days. I'd like to expand today's topic, but shift the focus from what's been happening in the corporate world to what's been happening in the creative agency world, and get to understand how remote work has impacted on client agency relationships and the work produced. And I gave a slight taste of that in a point I made earlier. So I'm aiming to obtain a few points of view from some of South Africa's leading creative agencies, as well as points of view from some of the top leading clients in the country. And yeah, if I do manage to achieve that, I think that'll make for a really interesting discussion next week, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for the time, and thanks for your insights and sharing all that you have today. Guys, that's the Lunchtime Marketing, happening every Thursday on eBuzz Radio at 12. Craig, chat to you soon. Have a great day. Cheers.
Kevin, enjoy the rest of your time by the river, and yeah, look forward to chatting when you're back on dry land.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.
Bye.